Thank you very much, Keith. It's a pleasure to see everyone, and I really look forward for seeing everyone in person, hopefully soon.
Brilliant.
And I mean, I'm very excited to have also people from the US, from North America with us today. Thank you for getting up early and being here.
Rasem, when you sent me your bio, you told me that you'd always dreamt of being a lawyer. What fueled that dream? Where did that start? How did that start?
I think it started when I was in my teens, and I would say maybe two reasons. First, it was fueled by movies. You know, seeing lawyers in movies arguing in courts and defending justice and making good things, making the world a better place. Especially, I would say, Egyptian movies and American movies, because they always portray lawyers as sometimes not so good, but people who make a change. So that's when I started to like the idea. And second, I wanted to do something for my country. I wanted to do something for the cause. And I thought that being a lawyer could advance the interests of my country, or, defend it on international fora. So that was my way of doing something, for being patriotic in a way, I would say.
And it's interesting because Maggie in Rwanda, who did the session before you, said a very similar thing about wanting to make a change and be part of the fabric of Rwanda's development in a similar way. Without being glib then, if you had to name a sort of movie lawyer that you've modeled yourself on, who would that be?
I would say it was an Egyptian movie lawyer. The guy, I think, is called Adil Imam. He's well known in the Arab world. And he always portrayed himself well as being a lawyer and as being, other things. But he has been my star, my movie star in a way. Okay.
And sort of in particular, what do you think was it about him, apart from that sort of wholesome portrayal? What were the things that you pick out that made you go, that's why I want to be like him?
I would say the ability to persuade the court, to see things, to believe in it, to believe in a cause, and to convince the jury or convince the judge or the court that what you're defending, what you're standing for is correct, is sound. And as a result of that persuasion and as a result of your work, to make a change, to make a prisoner free, or to make a difference, basically. So you would see the fruits of your work.
Is that because you were sort of an argumentative teenager and you just wanted to find a way of channeling that?
Maybe, or maybe, I saw other things. I saw other professions where people would work or do something, but the impact would be like more long. While being a lawyer, it was a lot about talking, and it was very visual in a way, and I enjoyed that.
And in terms of that movie star portrayal, and the movie star that you've become for Mackrell International and at the IBA and a whole number of other fora, what's been the difference between your perception of it when you were first starting and the reality? And has that perception, has that reality also changed as you've gone through your journey?
That's an interesting question, actually, because I always expected being a lawyer involves a lot of arguing in court, and as we see it in movies. Again, it ended up there is a little bit of that, but most of the work is a lot of paperwork, a lot of research, drafting, reviewing, etc. A lot of networking, actually, conferences. That's definitely I didn't expect. Definitely, maybe I expected a bit the networking, but not the conferences and seminars and that kind of networking. And that was a nice surprise, actually. And definitely, I didn't expect a lot of Zoom calls and Zoom events. I think none of us before 2020, none of us expected that.
So, actually, how have you then? There was, we all survived on Zoom. We probably hadn't heard of Zoom before, sort of about March last year, and we all survived on Zoom. And at the start of this year, there was a real feeling right there across the globe, across Mackrell International Network, please, let's not do any more Zoom calls. Let's do something different. And yet here we are. So as the leader of a law firm, as somebody who's influential in your country and beyond its borders, with the IBA and with a number of other fora, how have you kept the need to communicate on Zoom? How have you kept that fresh? And how have you changed your leadership style this year compared to last year?
Well, first, I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, I think we all overdid it. So there was a lot of Zoom fatigue. I went through that. I said at some point, more Zoom. But then I ended up like not socializing with people, not seeing people, not interacting with clients and colleagues, lawyers, etc., etc. So I felt the need for it again. So I'm trying to do a balance now. I do it. I don't do it too much. I try to do it once a day. I mean, at max once a day, a few times a week, and that's enough. And in a way, I mean, sometimes I have the ability of meeting some clients in person, but doing it in Zoom is like so much time efficient and saves everyone time, transportation, traffic, etc., etc. If I had a meeting yesterday with a client. He's in a different city. We were discussing whether he would come to my office or if I would go to his office. It would have taken me 4 hours to do the whole thing, going there, meeting with him and coming back. We did it on Zoom in 30 minutes. So, I mean, that's very efficient, time efficient. It saved everyone. So I think it's, even after the pandemic, and I see that, personally, I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I think Zoom will stay with us. Maybe not as much as it is now, but it will stay with us. It's a great way to connect with people and to basically stay connected whenever you don't have the time, the resources, or the energy to travel or to be somewhere else.
Because you use the word connected, and you, like a lot of Mackrell International lawyers, but possibly more than many, are a great connector. The countries you're connected with, the people you're connected with, is really quite extraordinary. And you've talked about how you always look about meeting somebody as an opportunity to be curious, to learn, maybe to give something which may come back at some point. So the last 12 to 14 months must have been very difficult. How have you changed your approach to Zoom connections as opposed to sort of in person doing that? And the fact that you haven't been able to get to the States and many other countries.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it inhibited my connectivity, because by nature, I'm a social butterfly. When I go to conferences or other networking events, I keep jumping from one place to another, and I enjoy it, to be honest. And I enjoy making new relationships and cementing old relationships. And it's never the same on Zoom. But yet we have those benefits that I've just talked about. So, I mean, in a way, it made work a bit less enjoyable. But I always keep the faith that this is temporary. This will change soon, and we will be able to reconnect again.
This too shall pass.
Yes.
We have a number of experienced lawyers on this Zoom call, and some up and coming lawyers, and this is very much projected at our sort of up and coming lawyers to learn from the experience we have. You've got your network in place. You've had time to build it both personally and professionally. If you're giving a message to sort of the next generation of lawyers about building a network, and building a network, number one, and then let's look more broadly at the legal journey, what would you say? What advice would you share?
I would start by saying, work hard. You would think that what you're doing will go unnoticed, but it never goes unnoticed, and it always pays off. When I started my legal career, I was an employee. I worked for a law firm, and I worked as an in-house lawyer at some company, etc., etc. And I was the kind of guy who would stay at work until 8 p.m., 9 p.m., etc., etc. And I had other colleagues who told me, why do you do that? I mean, just no one would notice. It will all go unnoticed. You're just it's not worth it. You're just basically wasting your life. But I had a friend who was a bit older, but he whispered in my ear, he said, nothing goes unnoticed. Just work hard and it will pay off. And he was right, actually. And, the world life has a strange way of paying off, but it always pays off. Also, I would say that, don't expect to climb the ladder really, 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 really fast. Be patient. Do things step by step, make a good foundation, a strong foundation. It's like building a house. If you don't build a strong foundation, the other levels will not be strong and will not survive. So build a strong foundation and, climb the ladder step by step. Follow your passion, do things that you enjoy, do things that, because you spend the rest of your life doing that. And if at some point you discover that what you're doing is not enjoyable for you, that you don't like it, it's never too late to change. Make a change, in terms of, where you work, the law firm that you work for, or the place that you work for. You can always become an in-house lawyer or vice versa. You can work in different areas of law, etc., etc. Make sure that you're enjoying what you're doing, because otherwise, it will be very difficult for you to wake up in the morning, get dressed, and go to work. Problems happen, issues happen, so always be solution. Sometimes we all need, have the feeling that we need to vent out and scream, etc., etc. But eventually, be solution-oriented. When problems pop up, think of the problem and think of the solution.
So if we go back to what you said at first in terms of building a foundation, let's go back to your early legal career then. Talk us through, how did you go about building your foundation?
Okay.
And at what point did you then say, I'm going to have my own law firm?
Okay. How did I start? Well, I would stage it into 3 stages. So the first stage in my very early career, just after, as I graduated from university, etc., from school, my goal was just to get a job. So anything that comes in, to be honest, I needed the money, I needed the expertise, I needed the job on my resume, I needed to be employed. When I get up, I needed to go to an office to work for. But once I got that, I worked there for a year or a year and a half, etc. I started the foundation. Then I started looking for the good opportunities. The ideal employer, the good pay, the good position. Where will I get better expertise, etc., etc. So I shifted to I would say that's the second stage, where I'm comfortable enough. I already have a job, but I want a better job. And that's I spent 3-4 years in that, basically comfortable. Then it was the third stage, which is the passion. Okay, I'm making enough money, let's say. I've had the expertise that I was looking for. I built the connections. Now, am I doing the thing that I want to spend the rest of my life doing? Maybe not, because I always dreamt of having my own law firm, to start my own law firm. So that's when I left my, previous job and started the law firm. It would have been more comfortable for me to stay where I was. And I was making enough money and comfortable where I am, but I wanted the next challenge. So I believe that all of us at some point go through these three stages. I just need a job. And then once we're comfortable enough, I need a better job, and better could be, as I said, better position or better pay or better employer or better location, different city maybe, etc., etc. And then I want the ideal job, which is my passion. And that's when I started my law firm. So, and it was good that the previous two stages built the needed foundation for me in terms of financial stability, network of, networking, relationships, connections, etc., and expertise. Without that foundation, I could have not succeeded in my current career, basically.
So when you talk about passion, is your passion running the firm, growing the firm, or is your passion still the law? Because running a business and practicing law, there are overlaps, but they're sort of two different skill sets in some ways.
Absolutely. It varied. Also, between the beginning and now, when I started the firm back in 2007, I would say it was only maybe 3 people in the firm. So it was 80% doing real legal work and 20% running the firm, because there wasn't much to run, to be honest. But slowly, as the team grew bigger and bigger, and basically we started to shift, became maybe 30, 50, and now it's the opposite. It's 80% running the firm, business development, taking care of clients, networking, etc., and 20% doing actual work. I always like to keep that 20% because I enjoy legal work, and it makes me feel that I'm still a lawyer. Now my tendency is to move more towards delegating much of my work, running the firm. We have an excellent team in terms of administrators and lawyers, and they do as good of a job as I do, and sometimes better. And I have a habit of only hiring people who are smarter than me, and it always works. So it's even moving beyond the 80-20 thing.
So I know you're quite humble, really.
Thank you.
So when you say people who are smarter than me, that must be quite tough. How do you establish that they're smarter than me? Because you're a guy who's not only gone through your own legal education in different countries, you've done an MBA, you have multiple businesses, which we'll come on to in a minute. So sitting in an interview with you must be a pretty sort of tough prospect if you're looking for somebody who's smarter than you. How do you gauge that? What are you looking for in your young lawyers?
I ask for referrals from. So I teach at a law school, at a local law school, and the head of the basically like the deputy dean there used to be a stagiaire at our law firm. So she used to work for our law firm. And then, she went and she had her PhD in the US, her JD in the US, etc., etc. She came back. She's a law professor there. And I always asked her for recommendations. So to begin with, I tried to get the best of the best of law graduates. Then when I interview them, I don't try to outsmart them or to, I try to make the interview simple. As simple as that. I talk to them as colleagues, not as superior and subordinate, and I try to check their analytics, etc., analysis skills, etc., etc., and I give them a chance. And the most challenging thing in our community is that we are a small community, we are a small country, so people are expected to hire people who are, from family or friends, etc., etc. I don't do that. If they're good, I have no problem with that, but it's never the criteria. The criteria is the best of the best.
So have you fallen out with your family over that? Because this is one of the things you do differently, is sort of you've said this before, sort of pushing against that sort of cultural trope. If you say that, you'll hire cousin X because they're family, and you go, well, no, I'll hire them if they make the grade.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I had some unpleasant discussions with some, family members, friends, etc. But people would ultimately understand.
Okay. You've talked about balance. It's words that comes up in conversations, and yet earlier on you talked about the need for hard work and for working sort of long hours. And to some extent, as a lawyer, if you're going into law, that comes with the territory.
Yeah.
I know you also run your law firm, 80/20. You're an olive oil supremo, now moving into Persian rugs and carpets. You invest, you take an interest in broad things. How do you maintain work-life balance? Or do you not believe there's such a thing?
Well, first, I'm still learning. It's tough. It's one of the toughest things, I would say, and it's an area where I could improve. But one of the things that I started doing differently in the last 2-3 years is I stopped working on weekends. So no work on weekends, except in very exceptional cases. When I have a deadline and we really have to finish something, etc., etc. I avoid travels on weekends. I avoid work at home. I don't take my work home with me. And, this wasn't the case like 5-10 years ago. I used to do all of these horrible things, but that we all do. But I make a point now of trying as much as possible to avoid that. Also, the other enterprises that you've talked about, the olive oil thing, the Persian drugs, I do it for fun. I want to make money out of it, but it's not the main purpose of doing it. I'm doing it for fun. It's part of my life-work balance. It gives me a break. It gives me something else to think about other than the law and the clients, etc., etc. So it's the point of follow your passion.
And is this a way of giving hope to young lawyers that, yeah, you'll be working weekends, you'll be working all the hours that there are, but don't worry, there comes a time when you can actually go, you know what, I'm not going to work at weekends. There's a point where you can hope for that?
Basically, if you work on weekends and if you work long hours when you're in your early 20s, you get the chance to do what I'm doing now when you're in your 40s, basically to less work, more fun, etc., etc. But if you just focus on having fun when you're in your 20s and you're not giving enough hours, etc., etc., you will not get the luxury of choosing your working hours when you're in your 40s or 50s, I believe. Life is tough. But eventually it's fair.
So let's talk a little bit about young lawyers. You have a very bright young team, and quite a number of them in your law firm. Sadly, none of them are with us. Otherwise, I would put them on the spot. What would they say about you as a leader?
I don't know. I would say.
What would you want them to say about you?
I want them to say that I'm empowered. I empower them, which I try to do. I hope that they learn from me. because I learn a lot from them as well. And I really believe in that. I believe it's a two-way thing. Being younger does not mean that you just learn from people. People learn from you as well. They have their own set of experiences, and as I said, they're very smart. Every day I learn something new from them. Yeah.
And what do you, as well as sort of learning from them and them doing, the job that you set them, and I suppose you've already said, putting in that time, getting noticed, when you're looking at your cohort of up and coming lawyers, what are you looking out for? What specific things make a difference to you as a sort of line manager, if you like, of next generation lawyers?
Other than hard work, I would say being detail oriented as a lawyer. You have to be detail oriented. You have to always look for, now I'll speak as a lawyer, you have to basically follow your gut feeling and look for red flags. If something is not looking okay, then probably it's not okay. Trust your feeling about it and stop and ask questions about it. I always tell other lawyers what I've been told earlier. If I read a document, and if we as two lawyers at the firm are reading a document and we're having different interpretations about it, then probably there's a problem in it. We have to fix it before we send it to the client or before it is being signed. So you get these kinds of opportunities while you're at the firm, while while the work is still part of the team. Use that opportunity wisely and try to fix things before they are sent to others. The point that I'm trying to make is try to use teamwork, try to use the resources that are available at the firm, including other minds, great minds, etc., to learn, to improve, and to make the job better.
Okay, and let's flip that round. Let's flip that round then. When you're looking at your cohort of next generation, what generational differences do you see? And what are the red flags for you? What are the things that when you see a young lawyer doing something, you feel the need to intervene or correct or guide? Let's put it that way.
Can you say that again?
I suppose it's a two-part question. One is, what do you see in terms of generational differences? Okay. And how do you accommodate that in the firm? And then I'll ask another question.
Okay. So I would say at the beginning of my career, the line was very clear between the boss and the subordinate, between the seniors and the juniors. We were expected to talk or not to talk at certain times, etc., etc. We were expected to go and sit and just do the work, not to talk much actually. For the better or worse, the line now is more blurry. And young people, they have the guts to stand up and challenge their boss. And to be honest, I think that is good. It needs a lot of courage to accept that as a boss, but with the experience, you get to learn that it's for the better. People like it, young lawyers like it, and they feel that they have a voice, they feel that they have an impact. And especially when they stand up and say, you're wrong, I disagree with you. And sometimes they're right, and many times actually they're right. So this is definitely a generational change. Another thing is that, when I started my career, older meant wiser and more knowledgeable. Given how tech savvy younger lawyers are now, this is not the case anymore. Younger are more tech savvy, which means that oftentimes they're more knowledgeable and smarter. So this is definitely a generational change as well.
I guess in many ways, it's how you go about defining what smart is. Because you know, there's use of technology, there's access to so much more information, not all of it reliable. In fact, Alison, who's on the call, says one of her personal bugbears with young lawyers is them Googling things, when in fact they should be being more systematic and applying more methodology to to the way they go about things. But it's interesting. There is a certain nimbleness and agility and intelligence that young lawyers have nowadays that maybe us slightly older folk don't have. But there's also something that's lacking. How do you teach that, or how do you guide that to a generation that sometimes think they can get everything off a smartphone?
I mean, it's a challenge because, whatever question you ask younger lawyers, they Google it. I remind them that, there are books and, humans read books for thousands of years for a reason. It works. And, there's a methodology, as you said, you have to go to precedent.
What I didn't see in there was any reference.
Case law, et cetera, and, it works usually. Basically, I always advise them not to take shortcuts. You have to do it the right way. You have to do the whole thing. I think what's helpful here is that for the bar exam and at law school, et cetera, for the better or worse, it's still not very tech-based. So people still have to use books and to go and sit for exams and do the writing, et cetera. But there's a tendency. It's very tempting to Google answers rather than to go through the whole process.
If you were to say that's a bit of a bugbear about younger lawyers, would that be fair, or is that taking it too far?
Maybe a bit, maybe, yeah.
Okay. Are there any others you see or you find?
Among younger lawyers? I would say they get bored quickly. They're impatient sometimes. Not all of them, I mean, but I've seen some trends. I mean, some patterns. Being impatient, wanting to get things really fast. What else I would say? Given that, 20 or 30 years ago, it was really difficult to travel. People didn't have the resources. People didn't have the ability to travel that easily. People now, everyone now can travel. People go on vacations in the summer, et cetera. People go and have legal education in Europe or in North America more easily than they used to when, at the beginning of my career. So people get exposed, younger lawyers get exposed. Being in the kind of country that I'm in, understandably, many young lawyers who get their legal education in Europe or North America would want to stay there. So it's getting them back, or some of them come back because they're required to come back, by virtue of their visa status or whatever, if they were on a scholarship, they were required to come back, etc. But basically, from the moment they step foot in the country, they start working on getting out again and, leaving again. And it's, you've heard what happened in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks in my part of the world. It's challenging to convince people to stay. And I've lost some of the best lawyers, not because they didn't like us as an employer, but because they wanted to change the country. They wanted to live somewhere else. That's unfortunately beyond my ability. I mean, I can try to create a pleasant atmosphere in the law firm, which I think I'm succeeding in, but I cannot control what happens outside of my law firm. So definitely this is one of the main challenges.
You and you know, we've talked before about you working as a lawyer in one of the most challenging environments in the world, and certainly the challenges are manifold. But it's never seemed to have held you back in any way. Not just the fact that some of what you do is, as you say, giving back, but also your connections are worldwide. You've involved yourself with Mackrell International. You're on the IBA management committee. You take a very outward and international approach to doing business. So isn't some of that attitudinal and looking to something you often talk about as well, seizing opportunities?
Yes, I mean, thanks to technology, no matter where you're sitting, you can reach the world. Even if you're sitting, we were under pandemic. Even if you're in the pandemic or war or whatever, you can still access the world and connect with the world. So that's number one, I think. And second, it's something that I firmly believe in, and I've said it before, and we discussed it before, Keith. If you see yourself as small, you will always be small. If you see yourself big, you'll become big. Basically, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's whenever I participate in international fora at the IBA or other fora, etc., people seem to be surprised that there's a Palestinian lawyer coming from a war zone, where whenever they think of Palestine, throwing stones or shootings or things or bombings, etc., and I understand why that happens, why they think of that. They don't expect that there are like international lawyers there or people who are business minded, etc. But if I keep thinking of myself as someone coming from a war zone, I will stay like that. So I decided to put that mentality aside. Just think just like anyone else on Mackrell International. I'm a business lawyer. I'm no different than anyone else from, I'm not worse than anyone else from the network. So once you get into that mentality, the sky is the limit. And it worked nicely with me. And I think that there are so many opportunities in being an international lawyer in terms of the kind of work that you could do, the experiences that you get exposed to, and even the friendships that you make, friendships that often change our lives. So I see myself as a citizen of the world in that sense.
Well, I mean, that was borne out the last time we had a Zoom call where you were on a call talking about a sort of major global IP client that you look after, and Arpita from Taiwan was on the call and said, "Oh, I'm an ISP specialist. I know them." And the next thing you know, okay, it's facilitated by the fact that we're all part of the Mackrell International Club, but the next thing you know, you're making a connection with somebody on the far side of the world in a practice area where you both specialize and potentially with a mutual client. So, it's about, you're right, it's about creating those opportunities and making those conversations happen.
Right.
A question came in sort of on that, and I think you've largely addressed the question, but you talk then about opportunities, and again about that mindset of if you think small, you'll be small, and if you think big and if you think international, that's how you'll be. So for junior lawyers, for next generation lawyers, how do they go about, what would you say to them if you were sort of teaching a class? How do you go about then implementing that thinking big, and again, without getting too far ahead of themselves?
I would say first, again, now with Zoom and virtual meetings and webinars and even the IBA is for the second year in a row is having its annual conference as virtual conference. this is a unique opportunity because often law firms were unable to send 2 or 3 lawyers to conferences because it's expensive. And so they ended up usually sending the partners only. But now with virtual, you can have 20 lawyers from your firm, or all the lawyers, or as many as you want participate, because there's no accommodation costs, there's no transportation costs, there's even the conference fees are much less. So that's a unique opportunity to get exposed and to participate in such fora. That's number one. Once things open up, whenever there is an event at your city or at a neighboring city, go and participate in it. Actually, one of the things that got me very involved in the IBA is that I realized that there was an event, a one-day event in Jordan, Amman, Jordan, to which we can travel by land. And at that point, I didn't want to put a lot of money into traveling and conferences, etc., etc. It was a tough time at our firm. Maybe that was 6 or 7 years ago. So Jordan was easy, accessible, doesn't involve a lot of costs. So I went there, and it was a one-day conference. It wasn't very relevant to my area of practice, but relevant enough, I would say. But the kind of connections that I made there were basically the foundation for a lot of connections that I made later. So always look for events in your city or in your neighboring cities. If you're in Germany, if you're in Vienna, maybe there's something in Munich that you can go to. Or if you're in Texas, there could be something in Dallas. You don't have to travel to Paris to an event, but there could be something else in your neck of the woods. So that's another thing. I have a rule on a different note, which I've lived by through my life, and it always worked well with me. Never to burn bridges, because you never know when you will need to cross them again. And that bridge could be your former employer, it could be a client who decided to leave the firm, or it could be a friend, or anything. If you leave a work, if you're working at a law firm and you decide to move to a better law firm, you don't have to leave with a fight. You can leave nicely and stay in good terms with them. And I've seen people who did that, and I've seen people who did the opposite, and I've seen the results. And it always works not to burn bridges. So that's my other advice.
As all of our mentors have come across, there's a wise head on young shoulders. I can say that. I'm not older than you. Who's inspired you, apart from your Egyptian movie star? Who do you look for or look to as your mentors? Because you said quite rightly, you're still learning. I mean, I hope we all are, and we all have that curiosity. So who has helped you and is continuing to help you along the road?
Okay. So I worked in 2003, I worked for USAID, which is the US Agency for International Development. And basically my work involved assistance to the Palestinian justice system, courthouses, public prosecution, etc., etc. And I had a boss, an American boss, who was very different than all bosses that I had before. In terms of, he was very empowering. When I came to him and I said, whenever I came and said, can I, tomorrow I need to come like 2 hours later because I have something in the morning. He said, you don't have to ask me, you just do your job. You're a professional. I don't have to you don't have to get my permission for everything you do. And it's not only that, but it's basically, he explained to me what I had to do, and he let me do it my way. The manner through which he empowered me, he trusted me, he had faith in me, basically was amazing for me. I've never witnessed something like that. And it inspired me to do the same. So I do that, as I said, we try to hire the best of the best, the creme de la creme. And I empower them. I tell them, you know, you do this, this, and this. They're usually a bit astonished at the beginning by the feel of power that they get. But with some guidance, they excel. They always astonish me by the results that they do. Another mentor, I would say, or someone who has inspired me is a client that I still have actually. And he comes to me and he tells me, you know, we need to do this, this, and this. I say, but, you know, you cannot because, you know, you cannot build that building, or you cannot do this because, you know, the land is only like 1,000 square meters. He said, but, you know, we always do things differently. We don't accept reality. We challenge reality. And he's the one who taught me to challenge reality and not to accept things as is, not to accept the status quo, to push things, to believe in yourself. And it usually works. And I think that's the difference between regular people and exceptional people.
So what's been your biggest reality challenge so far? And maybe pick one from the three stages of Rasem Kamal.
Biggest reality challenges. At the beginning of my, you know, stage one, I had to work with difficult people. Some of the people that I worked with were difficult. And I was at the beginning of my career. I didn't have a lot of leverage. So that was one, I would say. At the stage two, which...
So how did you, when you didn't have that leverage, how did you go about things? How did you either increase your leverage or become very zen in order to accept your lack of leverage? Where did you sit on that scale? What did you do?
It was tough. It was tough and depressing. But I made friendships. I made other friendships at that place, which helped me out during that difficult period, actually. And it's funny because at the very beginning of my career, I wanted to really separate between life, you know, personal and professional. And I think I went extreme to the extent that I said that, no, I cannot make friendships at my place of work. But then I realized that this is not realistic and not necessary as well. It's you know, it's great to make friendships actually at your working place. But I would say, yeah, I made friendships that helped me out throughout that phase. Second phase, I would say, as I said, you know, I was looking for work opportunities that are better than the first ones, you know, that better pay, better position, etc., etc. My challenge was that I had all of that, but I wasn't following my passion. So I addressed it by, you know, doing the foundation that we talked about, having it cemented, and then leaving to stage 3, which is following my passion. The challenge now is, you know, I'm responsible for so many things, and it's not only, you know, if I decide today to shut down the office, it's not only me, it's like 15 or 16 other people. So I cannot, it's a huge liability, you know, it's a huge responsibility. But I think, you know, I'm up to it, and we're all up to it. It's a path that we took, and we have to take it all the way.
So you have multiple families to you're now responsible for, I guess.
Yes, in a way.
So I'm going to give you a time machine, Rasem, and just while I'm doing that, because we're sort of coming up towards the hour, if anybody has any questions for Rasem, you know, please pop them into the chat. You've clearly inspired Pam, who says, you know, working with Keith is very difficult, so it's an important skill to learn, to be able to deal with that. And you see, I can take it. But if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll come on to them. But I'm going to give you a time machine, Rasem, and you can go back to 2 points in your to see your younger self. One in a legal context, and one in a personal or a business context that maybe has nothing to do with the law. If you were able to go back and step out and advise yourself, what would you say? What advice would you give your younger self?
I mean, fortunately, I don't have a lot of regrets, actually. One thing I would say on the personal level, I'd be less strict about things. In a way, I was kind of uptight when I was younger. Ironically, I'm less uptight now. That ranges from relationships to, everything else. But I was more uptight. Even when I was at law school, I was quite uptight, I think. A bit nerdish at law school, which sometimes comes with being a law student, I would say. But other than that, I would say I don't have many regrets.
So again, you're giving hope to the nerds of the world, and again to the young lawyers that say, maybe being uptight comes with the territory, and then you can become less so like you. That the man who turned up to the EMEA meeting, the last time we had one in Moscow, with the old excuse of the dog ate my homework. My laptop was confiscated in Tel Aviv airport. But we can make something happen. There was no sense of stress, much more stress on Merrill and my points and how we were going to sort of convey this to a sort of an audience waiting to hang on your every word. But we can see that relaxed nature come through. And you're saying that's something that I guess comes with age, as you get a sense of perspective. So again, yes. You're giving hope.
Yes. I mean, yeah, you said it right. It's the sense of perspective. I mean, at the whole picture, you don't have to be very uptight about things. Yeah, you said it nicely, Keith.
Oh, thanks. You see, Pam, I may be difficult to work with, but I occasionally have the good turn of phrase. We sort of a comment from Aram rather than a question, and not a political statement, but just offering respect for holding your ground as a lawyer, accepting responsibilities, and seeing the law as a vital profession. And it's certainly something that there's been. It's interesting in these MI mentor sessions that there is a sort of some golden threads that are coming through. One of them, curiously, is about lawyers being smart and working with their local universities to pick off the cream of the crop. I mean, Eduardo in Peru said that, Maggie in Rwanda. There seems to be a little bit of a theme there, but also talking about working hard as a junior lawyer, getting some perspective over time, and also that thing about, the law is a real profession where, yes, you work hard, you train hard, but there's a privilege to being a lawyer and to be able to uphold the rule of law, and that's a very powerful thing. And I've asked a lot of people in the mentor sessions, what keeps law fresh for you, after all of these years, and that seems to have been a thread. Would you say that's true with you, Rasem? Yeah.
I mean, it's a challenge. A lot of lawyers get burnt out at some point, especially in their 40s, actually. And I've seen that a lot. I've seen lawyers actually changing jobs, or lawyers becoming judges or whatever. So it's not easy. But I would say, you know, we have to take breaks, go on vacations. One of the ways of doing it for me is not to be too specialized, not to get too specialized. So things will not get boring for me. And again, that's why I'm doing other things like the olive oil or the carpets, etc. Because it's easy to get burnt out in our profession.
So, any questions before we wrap up? And then Rasem, this is your mentor session, so I'm going to give you the final word. So I'll give you sort of 10 or 15 seconds or so just to think of, okay, what is the final words of wisdom I'm going to impart to the group? No pressure. No pressure. Any questions? Any final observations? Look, you've stunned them into silence, Rasem. There we go. Okay, good. The mic is yours. Your final words of wisdom, what would they be?
My final word of wisdom is that as lawyers, we are leaders in our communities. And that's a unique opportunity. You know, people respect us. People look high at us, whether it's our families or our neighbors or people who went to school with us, etc., etc. And with leadership comes responsibility. So we have a responsibility to change the world, to make the world a better place. And as I said, you can do that in different ways. You know, by making peace, being a good lawyer, having integrity, serving justice, saving the environment, different ways. But you know, as lawyers, we are usually positioned in leadership positions everywhere. So we have to stand up for that responsibility and demonstrate leadership.
Brilliant. Rasem, Shahran, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, sharing your experience, sharing your journey.